didn't cry at the airport. I thought I would. I had been dreading that goodbye for weeks, standing in the kitchen at night after everyone had gone to bed, running through it in my head, preparing myself. But when the moment actually came, when my son hugged me and said, "I'll call you when I land, Mom," I just smiled and told him to text me from the gate. 63 years old, and I still can't predict when the tears will come. The drive home from Pearson was long. February traffic on the 401 is never kind, and I sat in the slow crawl past Mississauga with the radio off, just thinking. My son was moving to Vancouver for work, a real opportunity, the kind you don't turn down. I knew that, I was proud of him. But the house had already felt different for weeks, and I knew it was about to feel different in a way that wouldn't change. I was somewhere near the Dixie Road exit when my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I waited until I was properly stopped in traffic to look at it. It was a text from Odette. Odette had worked for our family for 11 years. She came 3 mornings a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, to help with the house, the cooking when I needed it, all the things that became harder after my hip surgery 2 years ago. She was quiet, reliable, the kind of person who noticed things without being asked to. Over 11 years, she had become something more than an employee, though I wasn't always sure she felt the same way. She was careful with those kinds of boundaries. The text said, "Please don't go home yet. Can you call me? It's important." I read it twice. Odette had never sent me anything like that. In 11 years, she had texted me exactly 3 times, once to say she'd be late because her bus was delayed, once to ask if I needed anything from the store, and once to tell me there was a leak under the kitchen sink. She was not a person who reached out, unless she had to. I called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Mrs. Hennessy," she said, and her voice was not right. Too careful. Like she was choosing every word before she spoke it. "Are you still driving?" "I'm on the 401. Still half an hour out. What's going on?" There was a pause that lasted too long. "I found something this morning," she said, "in the house. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call you while you were at the airport because I didn't want to make that harder than it already was." I remember the exact feeling in my chest when she said that, like something cold had been placed right in the center of it. "Odette, what did you find?" Another pause. "I think you should go somewhere first. A coffee shop, somewhere you can sit, and I think you need to look at the camera app on your phone before you come home." We had installed a home security system the previous spring. My son had set it up after a break-in 2 streets over. Cameras at the front door, the back door, the garage, and one inside covering the main hallway and living room. I had never really used the app. My son managed most of it. But Odette knew how it worked because my son had shown her what to do in case of an emergency. "Just look at the footage from last night," she said. "I'll stay here. I'm not going anywhere. But I think you need to see it before you walk in." I didn't go to a coffee shop. I pulled off at the next exit and parked in the lot of a Tim Hortons on Burnhamthorpe. I sat in the car with the engine running because it was February and -14, and my hands were already cold just from the walk from the car to my phone screen. I opened the app. The footage was time-stamped. I scrolled back to the previous night. I had gone to bed around 10:30. My son had stayed up later. I could see him in the hallway around 11, heading to the kitchen for water. Normal. Then I went further. 1 in the morning, 2. At 2:17 in the morning, the living room camera showed someone coming down the stairs. It was not my son. It was my husband. I want to be careful here about how I say this, because it took me a long time, longer than I am proud of, to understand what I was looking at. I was not naive. I am not a naive woman. But there are things you don't let yourself see, not because you're stupid, but because seeing them would require you to tear apart everything you have built, and the mind protects you from that for as long as it possibly can. My husband, Bernard, 58 years old, We had been married for 34 years. He was a retired civil engineer. He coached minor hockey for 12 years when our son was growing up. He made pancakes on Sunday mornings. He had driven me to every one of my physiotherapy appointments after the hip surgery without once complaining. At 2:17 in the morning, he came downstairs, walked to the front hallway and opened the front door. A woman came in. She was younger than me. I could tell that even from the camera angle. She was wearing a dark coat and carrying a bag, and she moved through my front hallway like she had been there before, like she knew where the light switches were. They went into the kitchen. They were in there for 46 minutes. I watched all 46 minutes. I don't know what I expected to feel. I think I expected rage, the hot, immediate kind that comes out as sound. But what I actually felt was something quieter and stranger, like the world had shifted 2 degrees and everything I was looking at was the same, but nothing was quite where it had been. I called Odette back. "How long have you known?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know," she said. "I suspected. For about 4 months. Small things. A cup rinse that I hadn't left out. A light on in the kitchen when I arrived Tuesday mornings when he was supposed to be at his golf club. A perfume I didn't recognize on the sofa cushions." She paused. "I didn't say anything because I wasn't certain, and I didn't think it was my place. And last night?" "Last night I forgot my phone," she said. "I realized on the bus home, and I came back. It was almost 10:30. I let myself in the back the way you said I could if I ever needed to. I heard voices in the kitchen. I recognized his voice, but not the other one." She stopped. "I left. I didn't want to make it into a scene, but I went home and I thought about it all night. This morning I went back and I checked the camera, and then I thought about you at the airport this morning, and I couldn't just let you come home without knowing. I sat in that Tim Hortons parking lot for a long time. I want to tell you what I did next, and I want to be honest about it, because I think a lot of people in my situation would have driven home and confronted their husband immediately. Maybe that's what you're supposed to do, but I am 63 years old and I have learned sometimes the hard way that the first reaction is rarely the right one. What I needed before anything else was to understand the full picture. I called my daughter. My daughter, Petra, lives in Hamilton. She's 31, works in healthcare administration, and she has her father's practical mind and my stubbornness in equal measure. She is not a person who panics. She didn't panic. She listened to everything I said, and then she said, "Mom, don't go home yet. Give me a couple of hours. Let me call Uncle Vincent." Uncle Vincent is not actually her uncle. He is my brother Clifford's oldest friend, and he has been a family lawyer in Oakville for 32 years. He knows our family. He knows our finances. He knows exactly what kind of documents I would need to protect myself before I walked back into that house and changed the dynamic. Because here is what I had not yet told Petra, what I had not yet let myself say out loud. 6 months earlier, Bernard had come to me with a proposal. He wanted to refinance our house. The mortgage had been paid off for 4 years. We owned the house outright, a semi-detached in Etobicoke that had tripled in value since we bought it in 1991. He said he wanted to use the equity to invest in a business opportunity with a friend from his golf club. He had spreadsheets. He had projections. He was calm and reasonable, and he answered every question I asked. I had said I would think about it. I had not yet said yes or no. But 3 weeks before this morning he had asked me again, more urgently. He said the window was closing. I told him I needed a bit more time. Sitting in that parking lot, with Odette's text still open on my phone and the camera footage burned into my mind, I began to understand something. The urgency about the refinancing had started right around the same time as the small things Odette had been noticing: the morning kitchen light, the perfume on the cushions. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I don't look for patterns where there aren't any. But I am also a woman who spent 14 years working as a bookkeeper before I stepped back to focus on our family. And I know what financial exposure looks like. I called Vincent myself. He picked up within 2 rings and I told him everything in about 10 minutes. He was quiet the way lawyers are quiet, processing, not absent. When I finished, he said, "Agnes, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't tell Bernard you know yet. Can you do that?" I said I could. "Where are you right now?" "Tim Horton's parking lot on Burnhamthorpe." "Stay there a little longer. Petra is on her way to you. I'm going to make some calls and I'll meet you both this afternoon." Petra arrived 40 minutes later. She pulled up beside me and got out of her car in her work coat and her practical boots, and she sat in my passenger seat, and she held my hand and we didn't say much for a while. That's the thing about daughters. Sometimes they know exactly what you need without asking. We met Vincent at his office in Oakville at 2 in the afternoon. He had already pulled the land registry records for our property. He had checked with a contact at the bank about any recent inquiries on the account. And he had a piece of information that nobody had told me. 6 weeks earlier, Bernard had submitted a refinancing application without my signature. It had been flagged and paused by the bank because the property was jointly titled and any refinancing would require both of our signatures. But the application existed. He had filled it out. He had listed the property. He had signed his name. Vincent looked at me carefully when he told me this. "Agnes," he said, "this may be more than infidelity." I already knew. The next 72 hours were methodical in the way that only shock can make things methodical. You stop feeling and you start doing, because doing is the only thing that makes sense. Petra stayed with a friend of hers who lived near my neighborhood, so she could be close. Vincent made arrangements with a colleague who specialized in family law in Toronto. I went home that evening. Bernard was in the kitchen when I came in making dinner. He turned around and smiled and said, "How was the airport? How's he doing?" I said our son was fine. I said the traffic had been bad. I sat down at the kitchen table and watched him stir something on the stove, and I thought, 34 years, pancakes on Sunday mornings, 12 years of minor hockey. I smiled back, and I said nothing about any of it. Over the next 2 weeks, with Vincent's guidance, I did what needed to be done. I spoke to a family law lawyer named Sandra who worked out of a small office in Bloor West Village and who had, she told me, seen a version of this particular situation more times than she cared to count. She was matter-of-fact and competent, and she did not offer me sympathy I hadn't asked for. I appreciated that. The refinancing application was formally reported to the bank. Because Bernard had filed it without my consent or signature, the bank's fraud division opened an inquiry. The business opportunity he had wanted to invest in, when his golf club friend's background was properly examined, turned out to be something that Ontario's securities regulators had already flagged in a separate investigation. Bernard had not known that, or said he hadn't. Petra didn't believe him. I was less certain. I think it's possible to love someone for 34 years and still discover that they have a whole other architecture of decisions running underneath the surface you've been living on. I think people are capable of believing their own justifications in ways that look from the outside indistinguishable from lying. But what I knew for certain was this. He had tried to access equity from a house I half owned without my knowledge or consent. He had been bringing another woman into our home, and he had not, in all the months of these things happening, said a single word to me about any of it. I told him I wanted a separation on a Thursday afternoon in March. Petra was sitting at the kitchen table with me, not because I needed protection, but because I wanted a witness. Bernard went very still when I said it. He didn't deny anything. He asked if there was anything he could say. I told him no. He moved out the following week. He went to stay with his brother in Scarborough. Petra helped me change the locks. which in Ontario you're allowed to do when you jointly own the property and one party has vacated, provided you go through the right steps. Vincent made sure we went through the right steps. The divorce proceedings took almost a year. They were not friendly, but they were not as ugly as they could have been, and Sandra told me more than once that I was better protected than most women in my position because of the timing of what we had documented and the order in which we had moved. Bernard ended up with a fair but not excessive settlement. The house stayed in my name. I am telling you all of this because there is a part of the story I have not finished. About 3 months after Bernard moved out, when the worst of the practical chaos had settled and I was starting to figure out what a quieter life looked like, I had Odette over for tea. Just the two of us, a proper sit-down in the living room with the good cups, the ones I never use for anything. I had been trying for months to figure out what to say to her. Thank you seemed small for what she had done. She had sacrificed something real. She had been a woman who understood her place in a household and had respected it for 11 years. And she had broken that boundary when it mattered, not because it was easy or comfortable, but because she thought it was the right thing to do. I asked her what made her decide to check the camera that morning instead of just leaving it. She looked at her tea for a moment. Then she said, "I thought about you at the airport, saying goodbye to your son. I thought about you coming home to that house alone, not knowing, and I decided that if someone who cared about me had information that could protect me, I would want them to say something." She looked up. So I said something. I have thought about that answer many times since. There's a particular kind of loneliness in betrayal, the loneliness of realizing that the version of your life you thought you were living was not entirely real. I don't want to be dramatic about it. I have friends who have been through worse. I had a house, a daughter, a son building his life on the other side of the country, a brother who called every Sunday. I was not without people. But I was 63 years old, and I had expected to grow old with someone, and that someone had been building a different future in the spaces I couldn't see. What Odette gave me was not just information. It was the chance to choose, to make decisions with full knowledge rather than half of it, to protect what I had spent 34 years building before someone else could make those decisions for me. And she did it quietly, without making it about herself, without asking for anything back. I ended up giving her a raise, not a dramatic one. Vincent told me to be careful about any financial decisions that could be characterized as emotional in the middle of a separation, but a meaningful one and permanent. She is still here. She still comes Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Last spring she noticed the eaves on the north side of the house were starting to pull away from the fascia, and told me before they became a problem. I still don't use the word housekeeper when I talk about her to people. It's never felt like the right word for what she actually is. My son calls every Sunday from Vancouver. He was upset when I told him what had happened. Upset at his father in the tight, controlled way that men in our family tend to be when they don't know where to put it. He asked if I was okay. I told him what I tell everyone who asks. I am more okay than I expected to be. That's the honest answer. Not that I'm fine, not that it didn't hurt, not that I wouldn't change what happened, but that I am standing in my own kitchen on a Sunday morning making my own pancakes, and the house is quiet in a way that took some getting used to, but has become something I no longer mind. Some losses are also, quietly, a kind of release. And some people who come into your life in small, ordinary ways turn out to be the ones who, when it matters most, simply refuse to look away. I still think about that parking lot on Burnhamthorpe sometimes. The engine running, the cold pressing against the windows, my phone in my hand showing me something I couldn't unsee. And what strikes me now, looking back, is not the betrayal itself. It's the chain of small, quiet choices that led to that moment. Every person in this story made decisions that accumulated, the way they always do, into the life they ended up with. Bernard made choices he thought no one would see. That's the thing about deception. It depends entirely on the assumption that the people around you are not paying attention. He was wrong about that. He underestimated Odette the way people often underestimate someone who moves quietly through their lives doing work that goes unnoticed. She noticed everything. She noticed for months. And when it mattered, she chose to act on what she knew, not because it was easy or safe, or even strictly her business, but because she had the kind of character that couldn't look away. That kind of integrity, the kind that holds even when nobody's watching, even when staying silent would have been simpler, is not something you develop overnight. It's built slowly, through smaller choices, until it becomes just who you are. And then there's what I did in those hours between her call and going home. I didn't scream. I didn't drive straight there and confront him in the kitchen. I pulled over. I called my daughter. I called Vincent. I waited. People sometimes ask me how I managed to stay that calm, and honestly, I'm not sure calm is the right word for what it was. It was more like clarity, the kind that comes when you understand, suddenly and completely, that the next decision you make will shape the next decade of your life, and so you had better make it carefully. 30 years of paying attention, of managing accounts, of watching cause-follow effect in ledgers and in people, that kind of clear-eyed thinking doesn't go away just because your heart is breaking. It's there when you need it, if you've built it. What I had to find after that was something harder than clarity. It was the willingness to keep going through a process that was slow and painful and uncertain, to sit across from Sandra in that Bloor West office week after week, to hold my composure through the legal proceedings while also grieving a marriage I had believed in. There were mornings that first winter when staying under the covers felt like the only reasonable option. I didn't stay under the covers, not because I'm especially strong, but because Petra needed to see me get up, because Odette was coming on Tuesday, because I had decided somewhere in that Tim Hortons parking lot that I was not going to let someone else's choices determine how my story ended. What I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that the three people who helped me through the worst of it, Odette, Petra, and Vincent, each had something that I think we undervalue in ordinary life. Odette had the moral backbone to do the right thing when it cost her something. Petra had the sharpness to see clearly and act quickly when I couldn't. Vincent had the steady discipline of someone who had built expertise over 30 years and knew exactly how to use it. Integrity, clear thinking, and the determination to follow through. None of them were dramatic about it. None of them made it about themselves. That's what I carry with me from this. Not the anger, that faded, not the sadness, that softened, but the quiet knowledge that the people who matter most in a crisis are rarely the ones making the loudest noise. They're the ones who notice, who think, who show up on a cold February morning and simply refuse to let you walk into something you don't deserve.